Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members and officers. Also, welcome to members of the public. Welcome to this morning's meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. Our primary task today, obviously, is to focus on the budget and the MTFS strategy, although we do have other items as well. For those not able to watch the footage live, and it is being broadcast as is usual, it will be available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. And as usual, can I remind members and officers to switch your microphones on when speaking, and don't forget to turn them off when you've finished. We do have some substitutes. We have Mr. Kaufman here in place of Mr. Bill, and Mr. Licorice in place of Mrs. Fryer. Are there any other, Mr. Yeah, Phil, who are you substituting for? Hilary Fryer. Right, okay. I'm confused now, so it's not Mr. Licorice.
Yeah, he's for.
Oh, Mr. Licorice.
Yes.
Oh, you're here for Mr. Bedford.
I'm not here. I'm here on my right.
Right, okay, I'm right. Right.
Two people here for Hilary Fryer.
No, we can't. Okay, that's fine. As long as we know for the record. Thank you very much. Minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of November. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of November are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Are you all in agreement? Thank you. Item 2, question time. There are no questions, nor are there any questions from members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. Item 4, to advise of any items I've decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. You'll be pleased to know there aren't any today. Declarations of interest in respect of this agenda. Now, I'm assuming that all members who are district councillors wish to declare a common interest, as they are mentioned in the report. Are there any other interests? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Anything that relates to early years SEND. Thank you, Chair.
And the reason, please?
My wife works in it.
Okay, that's fine. Terry.
Item 13, I'm a member of the Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust.
Okay. Any other? No. Right. Item 7, presentation of petitions. There aren't any. That then takes us to the main report this morning. Can I welcome officers and members, particularly the leader of the council, Nick Rushton's with us. The deputy leader, Byron Rhodes, is here. He's also responsible for finance and revenue, all matters financial. Chief Executive John Sinnott is here. Mrs. Richardson is here in her role as a cabinet member, and then we have also Chris Tambini, Director of Corporate Resources, and Declan Keenan, who's Assistant Director for Strategic Finance. Right, so how we're going to play this, Chris is going to give us an opening introduction and scene set of the overall position with the MTFS, which you'll be familiar has now gone to each of the scrutiny committees, and there is a supplementary agenda pack on the table of the minutes of consideration by each of the committees. We're here to look at the overall picture of the revenue budget and the capital programme, and then we'll move on to look at the two departments which this committee is responsible for, the Chief Executive's Department and the Corporate Resources Department. But as I say, we'll start with an introduction by Chris Tambini, then I'll ask the Cabinet Lead members if they wish to add anything. Thank you, Chris.
If it's okay, I'll do a pretty brief intro and then I'll pass on to Declan to take you through the report. I was thinking about this on the way in. I first got the kind of top finance job back in 2010, and I suppose since then there's been a lot of pretty tough budgets, but a lot of those tough budgets were driven by reducing resources, be that reducing formula grant from government or reducing specific grant. And you look back at the early days, 2013, 2014, we were regularly having savings in the order of 30 million a year. But they say the key driver was reduction in funding. The 2020-21 budget, I suppose, is the first budget where we've had a significant increase in income from government, and a meaningful increase in income from government. But to be honest, it still feels pretty tough. It is pretty tough. And the reason for that is really around demand pressures, which have really increased. So we're all familiar with the pressures around the ageing population, but the pressures that have really kind of continuing to hit us are things around social care, children's social care particularly, where we've got significant growth within the budget in the order of 20 million over the next 4 years. We've also got really big pressures in terms of the capital programme, and again, a lot of those relate to the population increases, increase in the number of households, and the impact that has on things like our infrastructure in terms of roads and schools. Again, massive pressures around there. But probably the biggest single pressure that we've got, and the bit that actually does particularly worry me, is around special education needs. And we'll get into the detail a bit more, and Declan will talk about some of the numbers, and I dare say that we'll have a bit of a discussion around it. But for me, that's the biggest risk that the County Council faces, and something that we've known that's been there for a number of years, but it has grown over recent months. So I'll pass you over to Declan now.
Thanks, Chris. I'll just talk you through the report. It's basically sort of 4 key sections to the report. First of all, it just starts off with a summary of the key points in the MTFS. Then the report goes into the changes since the draft that was issued in December. And then the report picks up the key sections that haven't been covered by the other scrutiny meetings, so sort of growth, savings and income that are in the sort of the corporate sort of side of the budget. And then finally the report finished off with the policies that accompany the MTFS for approval at County Council. So I'll cover the first 2 in a little bit of detail. I'll just pick out the big elements of what's in the central budget rather than trying to go through it all. And I wasn't going to go through the policies at all, basically because there hasn't been any significant changes. So, obviously happy to take questions on them, but it's sort of doesn't seem a lot of point going in a huge amount of detail on them. So first off, the summary of the key points. If you turn to paragraphs 6 and 7, and just a real quick reminder of the main elements. So you'll notice the third bullet point down, council tax increases 4% next year with 2% in the future years, and that's basically as hitting the maximum that we can that's allowed either through the adult social care preset or through the sort of the referendum limits, and that's kind of a real key part of the budget. £30 million income over that 4-year period, so we'd be in a very different place if we weren't raising the council tax. That little section then goes on to sort of show the level of growth. £59 million is big. I mean, particularly the first year at £24 million, which is primarily driven by social care, although there is some investment in highways in there as well, which is the first time for quite a while in terms of sort of significant figures. The growth is the highest we've ever had in a single year, and it does present a lot of risk in terms of this MTFS on future years. I'll come on to it later that we do hold a growth contingency for the items it's almost your known unknowns. We know that they're going to come, but we just don't know what they are in detail yet. But that growth is big, and it's our big problem. Our problem isn't any more austerity and cuts. It's about managing growth in a sustainable way. The next section is the next bullet point, pay and price inflation. This is driven by the national living wage, which we thought was coming to an end in terms of the main increases, but there's obviously sort of quite a big political consensus around increasing the national living wage to a higher level. So that's going to keep going up to 2024. So again, it's alongside growth, another big figure, £60 million over that 4-year period. To respond to that, we obviously need savings. The headline figure was 80 million. We've kind of 24 million was set out in the sort of the different sort of MTFS reports, whether it's sort of through department or the corporate side. 17 million at that stage related to special education needs, although I'll come on to that because there's quite a lot of additional pressures on there, and that left us with a shortfall of £39 million. And that 39 million pounds is basically simply just the gap between income that we get in and how much we spend. And we obviously need to find more savings to do that if we're going to sort of be able to say sustainable as a council. We should fortunately be able to do this in the context of the comprehensive spending review that will give us a better 4-year picture. So, there's a few of these assumptions will change, hopefully to the positive side, but until we get that comprehensive spending review and in truth fair funding that will follow it, it's hard to know exactly where we'll be. Just moving briefly onto capital. The capital programme at 600 million is huge. It's 50% higher than last year's capital programme, which was already a big programme for us. That's really driven by sort of the housing growth in the sort of the county, needing to put the infrastructure in place to make sure that growth kind of works, as it were. So whether it's roads or school, it's kind of, the additional population, the additional kind of build needs to be sort of accommodated in a sensible way, and that's what the programme's about. So there's an awful lot of forward funding going in before we get the money back, either from sort of land sales or from developers, to make sure that happens in a very coordinated way. That has meant that there's £200 million of that programme we need to fund from sort of temporary resources, sort of the cash resources that the county council holds. So we're trying to put the sort of strength of the council's balance sheet to good use, and that's how we'll do it. We'll obviously need to repay that, but it won't be after the MTFS period. So you will notice some revenue provision in the MTFS to make sure that can happen. So they were the highlights, as it were, of the MTFS. We have had quite a few changes, in truth, more than usual, and they're set out in paragraphs 11 to 18. The first one is kind of a big positive. Chris talked about sort of additional income, and this was a biggie for us. A social care grant. We got about a £9 million share of the £1 billion that was announced nationally. That was confirmed as part of the manifesto, and subsequently that this will be continued for the life of the Parliament, which is positive. There have been quite a few other kind of spending commitments from the Conservative Party, but we're not expecting to get the detail on those to either the budget or the comprehensive spending review. So potholes is the big example. I think they put £500 million aside each year. So there's hopefully some more positives to come. Turning on to the next page, the council tax base is just reflecting it's positive on the income side, just reflecting the additional housing growth, hence you get additional council tax. So there's a bit more resources from there. I'll take paragraphs 13 to 15 together. Basically, we've always included a sort of, through austerity, a sort of assumption there's further cuts going to come, and we tailed that right back down to sort of from about an £11 million a year down to £3 million a year contingency. And it does sound a little bit contradictory, austerity's ended, so why have you still got reductions? Well, it's because we know that there's some more things in the pipeline that are going to come and reduce our income. And the first one was kind of the business race baseline. We got confirmed a little while ago, and we've just sort of made it more of an explicit assumption this time that when they reset the system, the growth disappears, and that's for everybody, us, unitaries, districts. And we've got about 3 million of accumulated growth that will basically go back into the mix, but we don't know how that's going to come back out. Similarly, new homes bonus, there's been a lot of rumours, but this is solidified quite a bit with the local government settlement, where they've announced that there's no legacy payment. So basically, you benefit from housing growth in year one for 4 years by getting additional new homes bonus payments. But the amount they're going to pay relating to sort of the latest year is only going to be a single year payment. So they're going to be basically phasing out new homes bonus a year at a time. So next year we'll get 4 years worth, then 3 years worth, 2 years worth, 1 year's worth, and then it's gone. So we'll lose about 3.7 million. There's going to be a replacement system. Nobody knows what it is yet. It could be a very targeted system or it could be one that does spread it across the income across the country. But until we know that, we've just put the assumption in that we lose it all. Because we've put the business rate and the new homes bonus assumption in there, we've reduced our 3 million contingency down to 2 million and not have anything the first year. So overall, it's kind of it's left us pretty much balanced on a cash basis over the 4 years MTFS, but we're just trying to make those assumptions a bit more explicit and reflecting what's going on. I touched on the big inflation contingency, and this is quite a good illustration of showing how sensitive we are to inflation. We put aside about £15 million a year, but you can see there but that's by no means certain how much it's going to be. There's quite a few sort of moving parts, and one of them is that the high level view of the national living wage depends on average earnings for the country. And you can see that 10p sort of 862 up to 872 is just a simple sort of, it's just the maths as it were, as average earnings were higher, hence national living wage is higher. But the impact on us is huge. That's £1.5 million. So it gives you kind of a bit of an insight how easy it is for that figure to move around. At the start of the national living wage, increases were lower, it's gone higher. So we need to be very, very aware of that. Next one, 17, touched on the general fund, which is, it's all about, we hold that for the risks. SEND is the main risk. I'll come back to that because there's a little bit more in the report rather than doing it twice. And then the other points in paragraph 18 are fairly small, they're not going to be material. Overall, what that's likely to mean is I touched on a £39 million gap. It's likely to be very similar when we get to the Cabinet. We've obviously had good news on funding, but we're going to have a bit of bad news on SEND, which I'll touch on in a second. So the main changes. So over the page, it starts to pick up the non-departmental items on sort of paragraphs 21 through to 36, and I'll just pick up the big ones on these rather than going through them all. The first one in paragraph 24, G30, our growth contingency. So it looks a lot of money to put aside, 18 million without a kind of absolute clarity on what it is. And this is just based on historic growth levels. And what we do always see is that kind of people know what's going to happen next year, but are less certain in years 2, 3, and 4. And this just fills that gap, so we don't basically fall off a cliff edge, that we're not in a panic as more growth comes through. I would stress that this has been short in the last couple of years, so it is an area still, even though we've got money in there is still risk around it. We also hold the MTFS risk contingency, which works alongside that growth contingency, but we tend to use it for more one-off unexpected things. Previously, we'd released the first year of that and then just had 3 years of 8 million. But because of the overspend in the current financial year, we're just holding back another 4 million to make sure that kind of 2021 is as solid as it can be. 27, picks up the living wage again. It just shows that how that £59 million built up, but I've already covered that off. And then the final points on, sorry, there's one over the page as well. On paragraph 32, just picks up the capital financing cost. I touched on that £200 million, and basically what that means is we need to put a bit of money aside each year. So this looks slightly odd. There's two things that's going on. So capital financing costs at the moment are expected, as the report says, to decrease to 19 million, and this is because we're changing our MRP. And this is one of the key savings. It's £3.5 million per annum, and all we're really doing is just spreading over time or extending the length of time that we repay debt over. So we still repay the same amount, but it gives us a short-term benefit because we're not paying as much each year, just for more years. But on the flip side of that, we're going to have to repay this 200 million, so that hence the revenue financing of sort of capital increases again and goes back up. But hopefully we should be able to get sort of lumps of money back off a developer, which will mean that we can sort of get this sort of financing and capital cost reduced again. Over the page, the final point I was going to make on this was around central grants and other income. And the point I was really going to make there is we're still in quite a balanced position between certainty of what or things where we think there's a high likelihood that it's going to be sort of grants continued versus ones that we just don't really have a clue in, truth be told. So in paragraph 36, it lists out some of those big grants. And the first two, the IBCF and the social care grant, the £9 million, we've got a good level of certainty that they're going to continue for the period of the MTFS. Things could change, but, you know, balance of probabilities, they're going to be okay. But the next two, the social care support grant and the winter pressures grant, another £5.5 million. At the moment, we're just treating those in the MTFS as one-offs. We don't really know where they're going to land, so it could just sort of fall neutral, or it could be sort of further good news. But you can see the sort of the level of those one-offs that we're assuming is reducing, but this could still be a positive upside for us. But the MTFS does try to be balanced to allow us not to get caught by sort of short-term risks. That's all I was going to say in terms of those sort of those key items. The thing I did want to touch on over the page, on page 22, paragraphs sort of 40 and 41, is the SCND expenditure. Now this was already a big issue for us, and it was included in the Children's Family Scrutiny report, just to give the latest position. It's come kind of a bit of an awkward time for us because we're sort of trying to redo focus of this at the same time as getting the MTFS through. But at CFS Scrutiny, it was reported that we're going to spend more than the grant by more than was previously expected. And this is going to result in more cash being diverted away from other services than was sort of previously thought. And this has been caused purely by sort of additional demand coming through the system. And you'll hear this if you pick up any of the sort of the national articles. It's happening across the country. And the problem with sort of additional demand is it's not just paying for those places, but it uses up the capacity, and then you can't deal with the cost of things like independent sector provision. You just basically put in children where there's availability as opposed to where you necessarily want them to be educated. Previously, we thought that the cash deficit, and this is what the MTFS was built on, was going to peak at around £13 million. When it had hit that peak, savings would kick in. That would mean that kind of the growth could be offset going forward. It's not seen as that likely to be happening. The level of growth that it is, it's probably not feasible without additional sort of grant funding to be able to contain that growth. There is a bit of good news on there that government, they've given us some extra money next year, £5.5 million on SCND, and the indications are getting stronger and stronger that we're going to get more money in years 2 and 3. So we're going to have to do a bit of a fundamental refresh. But the CFS report did report that with demand, we're going to end up hit £19 million of a sort of accumulated deficit by the end of next year, which is obviously significantly higher than we thought before. And we do expect that to continue going. My guess is it's going to continue probably, sort of £6 or £7 million a year beyond that. So by the end of the sort of 4-year period, we're probably going to have diverted in the region of about £40 million of cash towards the SCND problem. It's by far our biggest problem in terms of the size of the numbers that are involved, but it's also our biggest issue in terms of the difficulty in resolving it. You're having to work with you're dependent on partners, namely schools, to sort of work with you on that. If we can't keep children within the mainstream school setting, we're not going to make progress on that. You've also got legislation working against you. I don't know whether you've picked up in sort of Richmond have got really clobbered in London on this. The local government ombudsman has basically made them go back and look over every single case that they've had. It's an unbelievable sort of administrative burden, but also that's going to just add to cost pressure. So you've got legislation working against you, the regulators working against you, but also the investment is unbelievable in this. For every £1 million we want to take out, we tend to have to invest about £2 million in capital and sort of other sort of surrounding costs. So it's not an easy thing to solve. So unless you've got those three things either working in tandem or, in the case of legislation, getting reviewed, it's going to be a tough ride for a few years on SEND. But that is it's the one to keep at the front of your minds. It's the biggest problem we've got by far at the moment. That's all I was going to say on the report. The report then goes into the policies. So I'll pause there and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I think you've really done a very good job in setting the scene. I'm going to ask Nick to comment now on any comments you want to make, Nick, on how you see things. I'll be pleased to have your views. I mean, I think there are four, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think there are four key kind of things going on at the moment that are going to impact on this council, in fact probably on all councils. And I just wondered if you could tell us where you think we are on those or what's happening. The first is obviously the devolution white paper that's been expected and what might be in that. The second is obviously the CSR, which we're waiting for. The third was fair funding, and then the fourth one I'd got was all the talk about still looking at the funding of adult social care, elderly care, and what might happen on that in this review, the latest review that's going on, and a discussion around, but maybe there'll be all-party discussion to try and come up with something that could be agreed. So I just wondered if you had any information you're able to share with us on those key things, Nick.
Well, I wish I did, if I'm honest. Can I thank Declan for a comprehensive introduction, and his team do a good job. And as he said, we've done okay. We're doing okay this year, but there are different sort of pressures, and we're still, all as usual, short of money. And as Declan said to you, our biggest worry is obviously SEND and the implications going forward of that, plus the national living wage. We're all probably in favour of it, but Declan has outlined the cost to us of the national living wage. Obviously a bigger effect on an upper tier authority than it does have on a borough or a district authority where there are less people who will benefit from it. And then of course, once we get to the £10.50 an hour, I presume somebody will have to look at differentials, because if they're moving the bottom up to the next level up will be moaning about differentials. So there's the worry of that. On the devolution white paper, nothing much that I know. Obviously, I'm in London last week. I'm in London again tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm substituting for the leader of the CCN, so I'm in with the minister tomorrow, not tomorrow, the day after. So I'll have an opportunity to chat then. I'm also doing the meeting with the minister the following week. I'm seeing the 7 Leicestershire MPs on the 11th of February. And all the things that you're talking about, we'll be discussing. So the reason, for instance, we decided to defer the local government white paper, which we're going to bring to full council on unitary status, is we're waiting to see what the government says, and if we need to rewrite our model, we will do, because something is definitely coming. All members of all parties, including your own, last week at the LG, everybody knows something is coming. They're talking of getting rid of fragmentation, no mayors, no money, all these sort of things are being mentioned. So I'm no wiser than you, well, probably better. I see more people down in London than you, Simon, but nobody knows for sure. They all know something is coming. Some models they talked about were bunches of districts, like, cause where they reorganised in Northampton, they're called unitary districts for some weird reason, but there you go. So there is definitely something heading our way, and we will have to be prepared for it. And I think financially we're in a relatively good position. In terms of the work we've done on unitary status, we're in a relatively good position. But it won't be quick. Even if they announce something, we're going to have to carry on with the system we've got for a little while. So that's why fair funding, the comprehensive spending review, is crucial to us. And the members of Parliament I speak to seem to think that fair funding will be arriving soon, but they've been saying that for a number of years, to be honest. And on the adult social care, I know, again, no more than you. I read what Boris says, and something needs to be done, not particularly straight away, but for the long term. So it's not a political issue between ourselves and the Labour Party or you guys in the middle. You know, it needs something to be agreed to fund elderly persons' care for a long, long time. So I can't really tell you any more than that. Everybody's saying they've not reviewed local government since 1973 when they invented districts. So in my view, I think something is coming, and we will be prepared for it, and we'll have to act accordingly. I can't really say any more than that.
No, I
Simon.
think that's you're saying. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. That you're saying something bigger than an individual. There could be a national plan, as opposed to at the moment the position is individual authorities don't have to put something forward which may or may not be accepted. You're now suggesting that the white paper may have some move nationally to some kind of restructure.
I think it's got to. I think the present policy that the government will look at stuff where it's agreed has failed. It's not really been agreed hardly anywhere. I mean, you could say Buckinghamshire's been half agreed, Northamptonshire's because of complete and utter failure. Somerset are now bidding for unitary status. A lot of counties and then you've also got the problem that some of the small unitaries, and there was a lot of talk at the LGA about the small unitaries, they're nearly bankrupt, some of them are. So I'm hoping that when they do announce something, they give us some direction, just some direction of where we want to go. Then we can all sit down and work out how to get there for the benefit of the people out there that pay their taxes to get their services.
Thank you for that. Byron, have you got anything you'd like to add before I open it up for discussion with members?
Yes, I think I'll just say something about the fair funding. The latest information we have from MHCLG with the new Secretary of State, Robert Jenrick, there, and his Undersecretary, a man called Hall, that's right, Luke Hall, I think is his name Luke Hall? Yes. From Gloucestershire, who's popped up. He was appointed back in the autumn when Boris took over, or back in the summer, I think, when Boris took over. And assuming that when the reshuffle comes, they'll all still be in post. But Luke Hall, of course, took over from the outstanding Rishi Sunak, who we got to know very well indeed. But the work on fair funding, we're told, will come to a head, and we'll get more detail of it come the spring. So we're only a few weeks away, and we're expecting to get some exemplifications of what it will mean for individual councils then, and also some insight into the way in which they have thought it through. We know something about the foundation formula already, because that was done last year. We know a little bit about the adult social care one, although there may be further changes coming in that field. We know a little bit about children's, but we haven't seen any real detail yet. And there's a question of highways maintenance as well as public health. So there's still quite a lot to discover. The real problem with local government funding, as I said for many years, is twofold. First of all, there has been this pressure on it ever since 2010, which is taking money out of its unprotected services, compared with, for example, services like the NHS, which have been protected and their funding continued to grow, but local government funding has fallen. And the second problem, of course, is the unevenness of the distribution of the funds, which has grown over the years since the council tax system was introduced in the early 90s, I beg your pardon. So, and fair funding should put that right. So we have a situation now where in Leicestershire, with the council tax increase that we're forecasting, which will be 4% in this coming year, 2% for inflation and 2% again for increases in adult social care costs. Our overall total for Leicestershire, including the district councils and the fire as well, will be about £1,722 for a Band D property. And that compares with £710 in Westminster. So that shows you the grotesque nature of the disparity in funding, and of course throughout the country you've got different figures, and we sit down right at the bottom as the fourth lowest upper tier authority, and our districts are in a similar position. But by and large, of course, it's hit the county more than it has our districts, and that's largely because of the new homes bonus and business rate growth, which the distribution of that, 80% to districts and 20% to counties, favour the districts, and by and large it's enabled most districts to be able to plug their potential deficits with increased revenue, particularly those that have had a large amount of growth. I won't say any more about SEN. Declan has mentioned that, and no doubt we'll want to have further discussions during the meeting. Just one thing I will say in this is that we probably have to adjust the SEN figures a little bit later on when we get to the cabinet report, because we're getting better information coming through all the time, and we know there's a certain amount of when this report came out, and the reports which went to the scrutiny committees were based on some older information, so there'll be some further adjustments there. It's not getting any better, it's getting worse. The effect of the pressure on SEN is that, of course, you have to meet the costs as they come, and it affects your overall revenue account. Is that it, in the end, in order to balance the books, and we will be balancing them for the next 2 years, is that it takes money away from the revenue funding of capital. And if you reduce that, eventually you find you're into more borrowing. More borrowing in the end costs you more money, and eventually increases, or has potential of increasing the debt of the council. And there are other threats to that as well, which no doubt will come out during the discussion. One thing I do want to talk about though today is there's 3 areas of small adjustment which we will be making, not in your present papers, but we'll be making in the cabinet report, and it's come through from the scrutiny and from other sources. We know there's a great desire to increase the amount of money available for shire grants, so we'll be seeking to put another £100,000 into that pot. We also are impressed with the work that's going on on the scams intervention project, which is so important for people who are vulnerable to be financially abused by scammers, and so we'll be putting another £75,000 in to continue that programme. And finally, £130,000, which at the moment is coming off the recycling and household waste site budget, as we were originally proposing to reduce the hours. We won't now be doing that, we'll be putting that back in again. But we'll be helped a little bit in the first year because we have a windfall from the county collection fund which should cover those costs, and the rest of it will build in. But compared with the overall budget, these are fairly small items. I'm happy now to contribute
thank you, Byron. I think some of those changes will be very welcome. Pity can't go further, but we understand the difficulties. Okay. Are there any other officers, or Louise, do you want to say anything before we open it up to discussion? No? John? Yes, Chief Executive.
I think there was one point you asked which didn't get an answer. That was about the CSR. I don't think we know anything more than you do, but you'd hope there would be an announcement at budget time which would at least indicate whether it's going to be a short or longer term CSR.
Okay, that's helpful. Right, so we'll open it up for members' questions. We are particularly looking at the overall situation revenue at the moment. We will then move on to look at capital and other areas. Could I ask, Chris, the growth that's going in, do you envisage that will require us to take on more staff to deliver that growth and make sure it's spent? You know, I mean, obviously that would be individual departments, but you know, it is. I can't remember, as Declan said, when we've had such a significant amount of growth. Appreciate that it's to keep things going rather than do many new things, but we've lost a lot of staff and had to reduce down. So I just wonder if to deliver that growth and the programmes and the workload, whether you envisage we'll have to take on staff.
Yeah, I think in some areas undoubtedly there will be more staff that have to be taken on. I mean, the one I'd kind of highlight would be children's social care. There will be a need for increasing number of social workers. There's no doubt about that. So yeah, and probably some other areas as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, Rosita.
Yes, thank you very much for the announcement of the additional grants. I think that would be very welcome. Will we get a briefing we can share with our residents? Because I know that, for instance, the Shire grant is very popular out there.
Quite happy to do that, Rosita. We've actually, we did send round an annual report itemising some of those things. There's also the community website, which gives information on the Shire grants, but happy to send something round to everyone.
Terry.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair, and thank you for the excellent report. There's so much in this. I want to stick to the kind of higher level stuff on page 21, where it talks about health integration plans. I'm aware that at the joint health scrutiny with the city, the UHL came to talk about their 450 million that they're getting to improve hospitals, which is of course extremely welcome. But part of that, there is a concern being raised, and I think particularly by county councillors, about the fate of community hospitals. And for us, clearly, care closer to home potentially is a risk, because we presumably will have to put in more social care. So has that been factored in? How are we going to factor that in to our future planning?
John, could you help us on that? Thank you.
I'm not entirely sure what that line, health integration plans implemented, is meant to cover, but to try to answer Dr. Einan's question, in Leicestershire, as reported to the Health and Wellbeing Board, we have quite a successful integration programme. The NHS agenda, which is now known as integrated care systems, requires that sort of level of integration to be done at the level of the city, county and Rutland. I think we can do that quite easily with the city when it comes to working at what they call place level, which is the social care authority. It becomes more difficult when you work at a system level, which is why the leader and deputy leader and the cabinet members met with the new NHS executives last week. My own view is that whilst there has been good, constructive, if sometimes awkward engagement at scrutiny level, both at county and city and county and Rutland level, what's been missing is that engagement with the executive politicians, the decision takers, and we've corrected that now, and it's been the same in the city as well. So it's good to know the new NHS executive lead has picked it up as soon as he's arrived. But I think what we need to do is concentrate on what we do well under Cheryl Davenport's direction at Leicestershire level, build as much as we can into the system level.
Just to add to that, I know I met the new chief executive of the UHL. I met the new chief exec of the 3 CCGs, and there was a lady. Who was the lady?
The new chief executive of LPT, Partnership Trust.
Yeah.
The existing chief executive of the UHL and the new chief executive of the 3 CCGs.
It was very, very good meeting. We've tasked the chief to arrange. I think we're going to do 3 or 4 a year, and we're also going to meet them again with the city council, with the city mayor, because what we thought was they do pretty good at engaging with all the scrutiny side, but they haven't really been engaging with us as an executive side. So we're going to do that, and they were actually very, very positive and very, very good to meet them, because I'd never met them before. They were good.
Okay, Bill Bolter.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, it's nice to hear the money for the tips is not being removed, and that's staying. So I'm pleased about that, because that was another question later on today. But could you explain a bit more about the end of the new homes bonus and what might be taking its place, and when these things might be taking over? Any details about that at all? And also, I'm a little concerned regarding the CCGs and struggling to produce a balanced budget, and the effect that's going to have on us, because we do quite a lot with the money we do get from them. If that's going to be reduced, how are we going to fulfil that role?
In New Homes Bonus, you're as wise as I am on that one.
Okay.
The government have sort of signalled that they don't like it, and there's a strong rumour that the Treasury don't like it at all. But they also, the Treasury, I am told through MP contacts, take the view that it's not provided the incentive for house building that they'd hoped it would when it was first introduced. I think we can expect that something will happen, and it may be replaced by another system of incentive for house building. What that would be is anybody's guess at the moment, and maybe there are people as we speak who are working on this down in London. The government's already reduced the amount of money available by half, and they've done that by curtailing the number of years that it will be allowed for and be paid for, and also, of course, bring it in the threshold as well, the number of houses you've got to build before you get anything at all. If it disappears totally, what we have said and what the LGA is saying is, well, the money should go back into the quantum and be distributed with everything else, because, of course, that's where it came from in the first place. And that might well just be the case. They might just abolish it, and it will just go back into the total. Certainly from where I sit, I wouldn't mind that at all happening. What was the second question? CCGs. Oh, I had no idea. Chief Executive's the expert on them.
I'll just contribute to the New Homes Bonus one. I don't know. I'm with Byron. I think they'll abolish it and hopefully stick it back in the pot. The problem we've had with New Homes Bonus politically is that the districts haven't used it to ameliorate the growth, which is what it was set up for. We've always done stuff with it specifically. The districts, and boroughs for that matter, have used it to subsidise the rates. And it wasn't really set up for that. So if you look at a district council budget, and one I'm relatively familiar with, only 23% of what they spent is collected in from the likes of me and you. The rest is New Homes Bonus and business rates growth. So the advantage of it going back into the pot as well is they wouldn't get the 80%, because not only was it a bad policy, it was skewed in the wrong way. In my view as a county leader, and obviously district leaders wouldn't agree with that when you're at a district, but as a county leader, I think the split should have been the other way. But we are where we are with it, and I'm sure it will be abolished. It's certainly withering on the vine over the next 3 years, Byron, I think, and then it's gone anyway. And John knows more about CCGs.
I'm glad you made the point, though, that it wasn't new money, and therein lies the problem with the incentive. It was actually top sliced off the settlement and distributed in the way you've described, and I think that was one of the major weaknesses of it. So we'll see. Sorry, CCGs.
As the report says, the 3 CCGs are under financial pressure. Typically, the health system is always under financial pressure. What's new is the CCGs are under pressure, whereas previously it's been mostly the 2 provider trusts. The NHS last year nationally produced their long-term plan covering 10 years. As a result of that, local health systems have to produce 5-year plans to fit with it. And there's been a delay in those plans being produced, which I think the new government has sanctioned. When the 5-year local plan appears, which should be sometime in the spring, for public consumption, although I don't know about consultation, that will, I think, give a proper indication of the extent of financial difficulty in the local system.
Thank you. Right, who else? Mr. Barclay.
I'm just interested in what I know. We're having 75% business rate retention. There's a lot of feeling, and for many, many years, the government has promised a review of business rates. Have I got any indication of when that's likely to happen? Because that's going to have a significant effect.
I have no information on that. I can tell you what there was worry about at the LGA is they're going to give us business rates and put it in the pot. They're going to give us a whole load of responsibilities, and then they're going to start abolishing them. So that's the worry we've got as a matter of principle. Everybody says they're unsatisfactory how they operate. And the worst thing would be to say, here you go, local government, there's all the business rates, X billion pounds, here are a whole load of jobs for you to do. Oh, and by the way, we're exempting any shop that's below 1,000 square foot. That will be the worry. You know, as a banker, you can see what I mean. You get the jobs, you get the money, and then they start withering your income.
Okay. Do you think this will be part of CSR then? And all those, is it going to be a strand on its own, or do you think it will be lumped in with local government? Because they keep talking about business rates and the impact on high streets. They never talk about the fact that it is local government that collects it and is such a key part of our budget, having took away the revenue grant.
There's probably sort of three interrelated things going on. They've announced a fundamental review of business rates themselves, just the interaction between basically the tax on sort of businesses. So that will kind of run its course to set the overall quantum. There's a business rate retention that's obviously sort of muted at 75%, but they'd already started moving away a bit from a pure kind of link to business rates and more a kind of an academic kind of exercise to sort of reflect the growth on the area. So when they review that we may find it just becomes a little bit disconnected from what happens on the ground. And the final piece is probably fair funding, because the business rates is similar to new homes bonus. It was only ever intended as an incentive mechanism that's just become quite cloudy with all the different sort of things going on. So it's probably those three pieces will come together before we get clarity about what it means for us.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, John.
And just on that, one of the things which intrigues me is what is actually meant by levelling up. Because one interpretation is that, given what Byron just indicated about Westminster's funding compared to ours, levelling up would see Leicestershire funded as Westminster. Now, I don't think that's going to happen for 1 minute. So the question is to what extent there's going to be some reallocation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by saying that this is a first-class report. This is really, really good. I can see all the elements coming together. I can also see the dark clouds in the distance working the way across. I think this shows that we're managing well, that we have good integrity in how we're looking forward and what we've been doing, which in my estimation is worth commenting on, the skills in which we find ourselves and the success of the directors and the management team in putting all of these bits together. So the element there is steady as we go, but we know that in 2 years' time it's going to get harder. And it's how we can manage what we can't see at the moment because we have no real controls. What I'm trying to say, Mr. Chairman, is I think everything this authority can do is fully exercised and is fully demonstrated here, which I congratulate them on that. But how do we really go forward into this unknown? Because we don't know, do we? And it's just an impossible situation to be in when we deal with the volume and level of funds and the enormous increase of demand of our services. It's going to be a tough one to handle. But I compliment Byron and the officers and the team. This is good, it's easy to read, and above all, we can all understand it. The numbers are there, it's fairly explicit where we are, and we've managed this superbly, but we will really need some help, and we have got to look at how we're going to fund ourselves in the future, because we just can't sit down and hope that something good's going to turn up. Anyway, thank you very much.
Okay, right. I want to move on to look at corporate and central items. But Terry, did you got anything else on revenue you wanted?
I just wanted to come back with a point on page 22, items 40 and 41. Oh, I thought we did. So, well, I think we did.
I've read through the whole lot.
We did. I was following it, and I scribbled something, so I needed to ask about it. Right. Right. So, yes, Declan, I think you said, and I quote, if we can't keep children in mainstream schools, we're not going to make progress on the problems we've got with the high needs block. So I think it's a question for others. How are we going to make progress?
We have made quite a bit of progress in building units onto schools. As Declan said, the capital costs of saving £1 million are £2 million. We do need to do more, without any shadow of a doubt. I mean, some counties have better provision than we do. It is a lot better if we can keep them in units attached to our schools, and we've done okay. But it's sometimes difficult when some are academies, some don't want it. But I don't know the exact number of how many schools we've built on, but I know it was blooming expensive. So can you answer me, Chris? Yeah.
If you look at the plan around kind of special education needs, I suppose there's two elements. There's a demand management kind of bit, and then there's the sufficiency, making sure we're creating more places. In terms of the second strand, we have been pretty successful. So I think it's in the order of 200 places have either been created or will be created, by the time we get to the end of this year. So we kind of made good progress. The issue we've got is the rise in demand means we're just filling up those places with new people, and we're not being able to shift the children from the very high private school independent provision into the new places we're creating. So that's the issue we've got. So we just need to try and find ways in which we can manage demand in a better way, so that we can actually get into that kind of shift into more local provision for children.
Because I'm not aware exactly of the numbers, but the growth in numbers has been vast, and sometimes you can't work out why. But they've gone from I think the figures are from 360 to 800 or something. They are vast numbers that are coming into the system, and people are aware of EHCPs. There are Twitter campaigns, there are Facebook campaigns. People are aware that they exist, and they know how to get into them. And there's no mechanism for stopping the growth in them. I mean, I know they're relatively small numbers when you look at the amount of people in the county, but the growth is substantial, and they're very, very expensive. I mean, if we'd got Ivan here, we'd be able to talk to you for hours about it, but we've only got money men here, so Chris might have an indication of the numbers of growth, but not maybe the reasons why.
I think if you go back over recent years, I think the growth is running at around 8% per year in terms of the increased number of EHCPs per year. So it doesn't take long for that to stack up into a very big cost.
Yeah.
I think if Ivan was here, he would talk about EHCPs. And one recent tribunal decision which has gone against us in the case of one child could mean a cost to us of nearly £500,000 a year. So whilst we need to do whatever we can to increase in-house provision, because that's a big part of the answer, we need to make sure we have a sympathetic yet robust approach to EHCP applications and make sure that we adequately resource our response at the tribunals. The system is designed not to support us, it's designed to support the parent, that's fair enough, but it's very loaded at the moment, and the financial consequences are just getting greater.
And the tribunals, we never, well, when I say we never ever win an appeal, we lose 95%. The tribunals are good, but they're like normal people on there who have no concept of costs, and that we've got to pass this on to the likes of us that don't benefit from it. So I think the government may well do something with the tribunal system, but we're going to have to be, I think the word would be more robust about who we let through the door, and then we'll have to, in my view, be more professional when we go to the tribunals. We probably maybe have to send lawyers, because we can't sustain an 8 to 10% growth every single year and lose 95% of the tribunals. And this is contributing to the figures that Declan was telling you about.
Right, okay. Is that an answer, Terry? It's not a solution. Well, I mean, I think you remember what Declan said and Chris said. This is the biggest concern, biggest area where we've got to try and manage it and control that growth. But this is the one you're worried about the most, isn't it? That it's the legislative background. Yes, and it's a national problem, isn't it? And we've heard that on a number of authorities. It's a very, very difficult position. Right, okay, so you feel have we covered adequacy of earmarked funds, robustness of estimates and insurance policy? You're happy you've said what you want to on that?
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything because there's no
Right.
real changes.
Let's move on to capital then. So if we start at page 23, paragraph 48, would you like to introduce the capital programme?
I wasn't going to say too much, to be honest, Chair, on capital. I just gave the oversight of the size of the programme. Most of the elements will have been picked up through the departmental programmes, and the corporate bit doesn't tend to be huge in the scheme of things. I'm happy to, probably it's easy to take questions rather than go over it, to be honest.
The only thing I would do is reinforce the point about it. You've got this huge programme in front of us, which some of the things are for our own needs to deliver, the services that we provide as a county council. But the greater part of it now is to deliver the services which are there because the growth in the number of people who will eventually be residing in Leicestershire. So it's growth in highways and schools, especially school places. And of course we're looking so much there for the contributions of the Section 106, the developer contributions. And we don't control that. We ask for the amounts proportional to the development and appropriate for that development. But it's the planning committees at in the district councils, who are planning authority, who have the say. And we are running into, from time to time, difficulties where they seem to be prepared to reduce the amount we get, or even not give it as at all, in order to achieve some other objective that they have locally. Now, if we get into a situation where it happens in a significant way, particularly on some of the larger developments, then the pressures on us will be enormous. And in the end, it finds its way back into, because we have to provide these facilities, it forces us into borrowing more money, and further puts pressure onto our finances, whereas that money should come from the developer.
Okay, so as I see it, there's two issues here. There's this reoccurring theme of needing to share this risk with the district councils, and you talk in a number of paragraphs on page 25 about the need to actually capture the additional income from the council tax. So I'd like to understand a bit more about that, what the ask is of district councils on that. Then the second issue is ensuring that Section 106 agreements do actually deliver what's required to mitigate the impact of the development, and your concerns there. So I think the question there is probably that the local planning authorities need to be sure about is, because in the end all they can do if they can't reach that agreement, the developers aren't prepared to sign, is to refuse planning permission. So the question in my mind is, are we making it clear to them that if they refuse planning permission and there's subsequently an appeal, we will be there with them at the appeal to defend, particularly where it's on the grounds of lack of Section 106, because that's, I think, the worry that they then get left carrying the can at the appeal with the inspector. Now, I've attended and I've seen some very, very good, strong, particularly on school provision places, representations from officers here in Children and Family, really put up very, very robust argued cases to why that funding is necessary. But I think it's important that the districts know that we will be there full square behind them if that is the situation.
I was going to suggest Chris might want to go first in terms of expectations of districts, and then I'll follow up.
so the issue around the kind of the risk share around development is, I mean, Nick mentioned it earlier, you have these 80-20 splits over things like new homes bonus and business rates. So in effect, the resources goes to the planning authority, but really the big elements of cost are really around kind of roads and schools, and they fall to us. So one of the issues around the kind of having a risk share agreement with the districts is you both try and get some of that new homes bonus and new homes and business rates into the county, but also it also gives the incentive to make sure that the district councils, in terms of their negotiation of what Section 106 agreements, and I suppose subsequently also keeping quite a hard line on it if the developer goes back to the district council, because if that happens, they have to bear some of the cost of it. Doesn't just fall onto the county council. So that's one of the ideas behind the risk share agreement. I mean, we're clearly in a position where hopefully we're close to signing one with Melton. But given the scale of development, I think the population of Leicestershire is due to increase by about 100,000 over the next kind of 25 years, and similar increase in the number of households, is if the current system of local government finance continues, we're going to just be bearing far too much risk. We can cope with the development and the infrastructure costs around Melton. We've got the development around kind of northwest Leicestershire we can cope with. If there's another one, I think we're going to struggle to fund it, to be honest. And I think we'll slowly have so much risk on our balance sheet that we'll have a real struggle to fund it. Hence why we need to get some kind of risk share agreements with the districts to enable us to, in effect, fund the development and the costs on the public sector infrastructure sort of over the next 25 years. Having said that, I do think the government do need to have a think through as well whether they make more money available at a national level for the degree of development, particularly in areas like Leicestershire, because the costs are huge.
Okay, John.
If it goes to appeal, we're happy to stand alongside a district, provided both county and district are on the same page. That isn't always the case. Frankly, districts sometimes seem more keen, for understandable reasons, to recognise the developers' wish to make a profit than to take account of the county council's legitimate requests for funding for infrastructure for roads and schools. And our view, as I've communicated to the Cabinet before, is that the development isn't going to work unless it's got the quality and amount of infrastructure which residents will require.
Yep. Okay. Do you envisage that there would be one of these risk-sharing agreements individually with each planning authority, or is it something that you would like to see collectively? In other words, a Leicestershire-wide agreement, or does it need to be done on an individual basis?
I thought it'd be on an individual basis. What would work in Melton, I think, would be quite different to what works with West Leicestershire. And there could even be some districts where you don't actually need a risk share agreement because there isn't too much risk to share because you're pretty certain the developer contributions are going to come through. So I think it depends on the scheme and the degree of risk it generates.
Mr. Kaufman.
Chair, I'm new to this committee, first time attending, but I was interested in the answer just now relating to 106 monies, which I think you were talking about. My understanding was it's up to us as an authority to put a robust case towards the district planners in order to get the money that we require. I think of it with the 106 monies we get from the health authorities, CCGs, or for the CCGs. In Oakby and Wigston, for a number of years, we haven't been able to get 106 monies for housing developments because of the poor case put forward by the CCGs, and it's only because of arguments that Bill and I have been having over the years that they've improved and made it possible. But at the end of the day, surely it's us to put the robust case, and if we put a robust case which enables the planning authorities to get the money, surely that was my understanding of the way the system worked. So I'm a bit confused.
Particularly focusing on county services here, which of course health is outside. I recognise what you're saying about problems in the past. I think this has been discussed, hasn't it, John, that their input into 106?
Yeah, in the case of health, I think under their new leadership, they would admit they haven't got their act together when it comes to making 106 requests. That will change, I'm sure. to answer your question, from the County Council, we do make robust, well-argued, well-evidenced cases. But ultimately, it's a matter for the District Planning Authority to accept them, and that does not always happen.
For instance, sometimes, Gerald, they'll say they want social housing, and Jeffrey, sorry, and they'll sacrifice our asks because they want more, well, not social, more affordable housing, and they're persuaded by the developers that they can't have both. And developers are quite robust and professional in rebutting our requests. You know, developers nowadays will pay specialist people to come in and show that their site is unsustainable with our requests. Now, I say to them they should just refuse them, because we cannot have these huge developments without the social consequences of these huge developments. And it's not just roads and schools, it's the whole system. The days of building wall-to-wall houses all looking exactly the same are gone. People don't want to live in that sort of stuff. We want proper communities built, and they need to make the commitments. They need to pay less for the land, maybe, if they can't afford their commitments. And ultimately, if they can't afford their commitments, we've got to damn well refuse them. Otherwise, they fall on us, you know, as taxpayers. If we can't get it out of the developer, we end up paying, and that is not right.
Mr. Bolter.
I know it's only part of this morning, but surely this is a conversation one should have with central government and with their planning inspectorate when it comes to appeals. Because very often we lose appeals because of this very thing. I don't think at the present time you can turn an application down if the developer refuses to give 106 money for certain things. I think the planning inspector were very reluctant to refuse an application for that. And John's quite right that it's the balance between affordable housing, highways. The developer doesn't like paying 106 money in the first place, so they'll always try and wriggle out of it. But it's who comes off at the end of the day. But I think if a lead was shown with central government that the planning inspectorate would support refusals for not paying 106 monies, we'd all be a lot better off. But at the minute, developers seem to get away with it, and I think that is wrong. But if money's needed, it's needed. Developers should pay it, but it's up to central government to instruct the inspectorate to make sure that people do get the money they're entitled to get. I look on the leaders to actually talk to his colleagues in central government about that.
We could try. Right, okay.
Well,
Any other questions on capital?
Obviously that is true, but the problem we've got is the system isn't set up right. We're operating in a two-tier system which will operate for a few more years no matter what happens. But the problem is, as Chris said, the big financial responsibilities rest with the person that doesn't determine the application. And it also doesn't make for a particularly speedy determination of an application. But we are where we are with two-tier. We do our best with it. We work with district council where we can, but ultimately the system needs solving, and it needs to be one planning authority. And it should be the one that has the bigger financial responsibilities. But that, you know, we don't want to get into an argument about that. It is just how it is.
We need to move on.
Right, okay. Any other questions on capital? We're all happy on that. So, any closing statements on the overall situation? I think we've had a good review and a much better understanding. Even if we haven't got the answers, we understand what the challenges are and what the pressures are moving forward, which I think is very useful.
Just do a brief one, if I may, Chairman. I mean, the remarkable thing about this council is that we, despite all these pressures and being the poorest funded, is that we, over the years, have kept pace with every settlement and made sufficient savings to break even. In some cases, we've found ourselves with surpluses, which has enabled us to put money aside to fund capital. We're running out now of savings that we can make. We've taken more than £200 million a year out of our costs over the years, and there's very little still to go. It comes a point where they've literally bled us dry, and if it carries on eventually and the erosion, the increase in cost continues and there is no more money, I'm afraid won't be able to do it. But I don't think that will happen. I think fair funding will come in and improve the situation next year. That's what I'm hoping for anyway.
Byron, you've been hoping for a long, long time. We hope you are right in your hopes.
Not only hoping, Chairman, we've been working hard on it as well with the lobbying, and there does seem to be a mood now that this is going to happen. But it has to be accompanied with an increase generally for local government, I think, and so the two things are there. So I think the government will have to put more money into local government in total in order to bring the full fair funding in, because as been remarked earlier on, Westminster are not going to give up their huge amounts of revenue funding and hand it over to Leicestershire, not without a fight anyway.
Okay, thank you very much for your closing statement. Right, thank you very much. We've covered the overall situation then. We're now going to move on to item 9, which is the Chief Executive's Department budget. I think we need to just change the top table a little bit. Service heads to join us from Chief Execs, please. Do we need him for that?
I don't know.
Blake, don't we?
He's not here, is
No. Right, so we're going to page 59 of the agenda. Joint report of the Chief Executive and Director of Corporate Resources. We're going to look briefly at the Chief Exec's Department's budget. Who wants to lead off on this, John?
Thank you. As you can see, as a department, we provide a range of support services. In the case of growth, the first item is unchanged from the previous MTFS. The items on pages 58 and 59 are new. All the savings items are unchanged from the previous MTFS. And since the capital programme in respect of Shy grants has had some comment already, perhaps I'll just leave that to any further questions.
Any other comments from the top table before I open the Chief Executive Department budget? Right, questions about this part of the budget? Terry.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could address one to John, page 5920. It seems an awful long time since the 24th of May Cabinet decision, and the growth unit still doesn't seem to be up and running. I just wonder if you can give us any timescales with the importance attached to it when it's going to be there doing its job.
Shall I respond? The report was set up on the basis of two things, really, both of which you've had mentioned this morning. One was the scale of growth planned in Leicestershire, and the second was the impact on the capital programme. I remember it mentioned that the exposure to the capital programme just in respect of Melton is around £100 million, and you can multiply that. So what the report also said is that the growth unit would effectively come into being on the 1st of April this year. There was 250,000 earmarked from underspends to support it between May and now. What has happened in practice is that nearly all the efforts we've had to make have been in respect of Lutterworth East, the scheme which is being considered separately. Having said that, we've had some very constructive discussions with two districts in particular, Harbour and Blaby, about major projects in their patch. We're operating with a skeleton staff. We probably will end up with 3 or 4. Bear in mind the report to the Cabinet in May also talked about capacity in property and in departments like Children's Services and E&T, which have obviously major responsibilities in this area. But we've failed to recruit to 2 posts. We've recruited to 2. We've failed to recruit to 2 just because of market conditions. So that's held us up. We've had to balance that with the work on Lutterworth East and dealing with those districts where there are major schemes coming up, like Blaby and Harbour, and indeed North West Leicestershire as well. But we aim to be up and running properly from the 1st of April.
Okay. Any other questions on the Chief Executive? Kevin.
Thank you, Chairman.
Section 30 on page 61, superfast broadband. County's done reasonably well getting the broadband spread across the county, but obviously we're now into phase 3 and indeed phase 4, and it's phase 4 I'm particularly interested in because we still don't seem to have any kind of timescales for it. I gather it's, as it says here, it's currently being tendered, but I was told that about 4 months ago, and I'm just wondering where we are with that rollout.
One, please.
Yeah, the lead officer is Tom Pennell, who's unfortunately on leave at the moment, so I'll have to take that back and come back.
What we normally do on those matters is ask for a written note to be provided through Democratic Services Committee officer, and Rosemary will then circulate that to members of the Commission. Are you happy to arrange the relevant officers to do that? Okay, Kevin? Anything else? Chief Execs? All very brief, very quiet. You're obviously happy with the way this budget's being operated, the growth items, particularly around the coroner's service, Shire grants. I'm going to let the officers go if you don't have any other questions. Right, thank you very much. Change the top table again, please, because we're now going to look at the Resources Department, Corporate Resources. Page 69, please. Medium-term financial strategy, corporate resources. And Chris is coming back. Didn't even have time to drink your coffee. Poor Chris. And Declan's back. Strategic Director, Assistant Director, Strategic Finance. Right. Who'd like to lead off on this area of the budget?
I'll lead as lead member for this. I mean, there are a number of services within the Corporate Resources Department, apart from finance, and finance is a very large one, of course, and you're more familiar with that. But we've also got all our HR work there, all work on IT, property, customer services, and the commercial services as well, particularly for example, the school meal service and the restaurant service and so on. And it's a total budget of about £33 million, which is pretty well stable now. One part of it, the commercial services, actually makes a profit, 1.6 million, and we'd like it to make £2 million a year profit, but it actually does make a profit, which is actually very, very satisfying. The others, of course, are direct services which don't have the income streams to make a profit. Property is one of the growth areas because one time it was a fairly small department, but now, of course, we're investing in more commercial property. We've had to expand it, and of course, we're very active in that area, so the number of people we've got has gone up, so those costs have gone up. But then, on the other hand, as we've put more money into property, we've got bigger returns as well. So we've got a fairly stable service here. We are putting forward a certain amount, a little bit of growth, and we're still trying to make some savings, particularly in 2021. I'll let the director talk about those.
If I can just make a couple of comments. If you look at the table in paragraph 8, you can kind of see that the starting point for the 4-year budget is a budget of £34.8 million, and then after you've added various kind of growth and savings over the next 4 years, that actually reduces to 31.5. So quite a sizable reduction in the budget. Not a huge amount of growth, but some quite significant savings. That's going to be challenging to deliver. There's no doubt that's going to be challenging to deliver. The pressure that you've talked about in the previous item in terms of pressures on the whole organisation, be it around SEN, social care, whatever, they do flow through into support services. There will be extra pressure on on the people who work within corporate resources. So it will be a pressure to deliver. I expect we will deliver it. I kind of think in terms of the savings, there's a big chunk around the income from the Corporate Asset Investment Fund. I'm kind of hopeful that we're going to actually kind of exceed the target we put within this budget. But I say there are pressures within the organisation, I think, which could well flow through over coming years. That was all I was going to say by way of introduction. I'm very happy to kind of pick up any kind of detailed questions.
Okay. Questions? Bill Bolter.
Thank you. Yes, page 71. Item 18, G35. Was this extra increase in staff anticipated when we took this project on, or is this going to hit the bottom line, making less money than we thought we were going to make? I'd have thought that when we decide to go to these schemes, we, anticipate what staff would be required, and that would come out of the total cost of the scheme, and not come with this as an extra item on this budget.
We generally try not to kind of net off the income that comes in with the expenditure. So this is some industrial resources that are going into property, principally around, you can see the size of the capital programme is £600 million over the next 4 years. With that kind of size of capital programme, it clearly brings extra demands on property staff. And within that, you've got the corporate asset investment fund, but you've also got things like the social care investment programme, where we're actually investing in, I don't know, not care homes, but kind of supported living for older adults, and that brings with it a certain amount of work, extra work for property staff as well. So there's a fairly modest amount. I mean, the other element of that is actually around energy efficiency schemes as well. So I think that's a pretty modest increase in resources for what is a huge kind of ask in terms of the property function around the capital programme.
Chair. Item G37. Complaints against the council. So this is a direct cost on the taxpayer if we don't get the job right in the first place. And now we're asking for more staff to handle the complaints. So isn't the answer to get the thing right in the first place, so we don't get the complaints in the first place, rather than employ more staff to put it right?
Are complaints going up, or are they getting more complex?
I mean, there is a combination of the two. I mean, we've talked a lot around kind of SEN earlier in the meeting. As we make decisions around those children, and they're not decisions that parents particularly kind of want, that can turn into a corporate complaint. So, it's not a huge amount. It's £50,000, so it's not a huge amount of additional resources. But connected with the extra demand being faced by the authority, that can flow through into an increased volume of complaints and greater complexity as well.
Can I just say, just for Mr. Boulder's information, it isn't just the SEN issues which have been mentioned this morning, it's SEN transport as well, when the complaints are just growing. And that's one area, again, where we did, with item to the fore, point out to the government the legislation was always going to cause these problems.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. I just got one on paragraph 41, the climate change. Appreciate that's just work in relation to this department. It doesn't seem a huge amount of money for the climate change agenda. Presumably each department will have its own programme eventually when we have the new strategies. Is that right? And it will all be shown separately, rather than that you'll have a corporate pot of money for addressing climate change?
I mean, it's currently split department by department, but we will try and actually within the corporate report actually pull it all together, because when you look at the pressures on the capital programme, we've got a figure overall, haven't we? 16. Yes, it's £16 million in terms of addressing kind of carbon reduction, and I dare say probably when we do this next year, I dare say that would have increased somewhat. But so the bulk of it is actually within corporate resources, because a lot of it does kind of relate to the solar farm at Corn.
16 million, that's a 4-year figure, is it, for the MTFS? Yeah, okay. So it will roll forward. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Rosita.
Thank you. I'd just like small explanation, page 79, and it's just very much as part of my education. If we're looking at the industrial properties, the corporate asset investment fund and the country farms, we have got an income And then we have got a gross expenditure. So I've got two questions. The gross expenditure in the industrial properties and the asset investment fund, does that take into account the cost of developments getting it ready up to a planning stage? And so is that accounted for in that gross expenditure? And my second question, it is, if we are looking at our county councils, county farms, property holding, it's rather large. So, just above £1 million is a very small return. And we're talking 727 of gross expenditure. Do I assume, so the profit is very low as well, so do I assume that is maintenance and repairs, etc.? And if it is maintenance and repairs, etc., then it really has got to raise the value of the assets. And then, and this, I know it's going right back, but it's then got to link to page 53, really, where you are talking about the CAIF financial indicators. Should that not be reflected in there? Thank you.
That's quite a detailed question. Are you able to do with that, or would you write now or written response? You are. Okay, thank you.
I'll give it a whirl. So the first question about what those costs incur, whether it's at sort of the development stage, and you'll get kind of phases it goes through. So if you notice the very top line, strategic property, and that's where people like sort of John Bennett's costs will get paid for. So people who are doing the kind of very upfront development stuff, it'll just be part of the teams within there. As the project then either moves into kind of acquisition or sort of planning type things, most of those costs will get charged into the capital programme. So they won't get, this is just the revenue budget, so they won't get captured on here, they'll get captured on the capital programme. And then they'll come back in there when that sort of site's up and running, and then we start to pay the maintenance costs and generate that sort of revenue income. So that's kind of the first bit, how it splits between almost those three phases of kind of bit of internal work, then switches to the capital programme as it builds out, and then back into here as it becomes a business as usual sort of ongoing running. So is that okay for the first bit? Yeah. So the second bit was around the county farms and the sort of the low level of returns, and you're right in that sort of 727, most of that will be sort of maintenance and repairs. We also include some as well in the capital programme where it's more a fundamental infrastructure, I don't know, sort of like they've redone drainage and things like that over the last few years. So actually the revenue from returns from farms is actually a bit less than that £500,000. And you're right, that is quite a low level return, but that's only kind of looking at half the story for farms, where the big sort of financial benefit of farms tends to come if you convert farmland into sort of housing land and you get a big sort of capital uplift on there. So the farms tend to be sort of held for half service purpose in that it's kind of, I suppose, good to support the sort of the local smaller farmers, but also that kind of with an eye on the sort of the longer term investment. If you convert some of that farmland, it's very, very sort of valuable if it does convert to sort of housing or infrastructure uses.
Please, may I come back, please? But then, should we not reflect that into the financial indicators? And also, then, at one point, do we not have to set corporately a percentage of how much farmland we're going to open up to development?
If I try to within the reporting we do on the corporate asset investment fund, that does include the return on farmland. So we do report on it. Usually comes through in the June time, and actually it will be coming to this meeting, so you will be able to see the return. The actual, I can't remember the exact valuation of our farmland, but I'm pretty certain it's below 30 million at agricultural kind of land prices. So it's not, although it's quite a big holding in terms of the number of acres, actually in terms of agricultural land value, it's not a huge amount, so the return is commensurate with actually the value of that holding. So it's not a huge amount of return, but as Declan says, the key thing is you've got that land holding and it converts into a bigger return if you can get planning for another purpose.
Okay, Terry Einan.
Yes, I was very pleased to see in this report the mention of Snibston, and that the £1 million to continue the improvements there has not been lost. The community were very keen. But what I wanted to focus on and also be positive about is the points 25 and 26. It's nice to see that we're saving money by using solar panels and reducing carbon emissions, which is very positive. But a little bit worried about point 17, where it says that there was a delay to realising efficiencies and savings from technological improvements to working practices. And I wasn't entirely sure what those were. My personal experience as a county councillor of attempting to use Skype has not been good, though I have had some great help from officers, and I think I might have cracked it, but I'm not sure. But then that is my main substantive question, is about 36 and 39 and about digital, and where, you know, what are we going to see in kind of improvements, perhaps particularly around how we work in the as members. You know, I'm aware that I've got several chunks of paper that arrive at my home on a regular basis, and how expensive is that, and not only that, but it's not good for trees to chop them down and turn them into paper. I know that other councils are using ModGov. We seem to have stalled on that technological innovation.
There's actually been some very good progress around digital. I mean, what we're currently doing at the moment is, I mean, I think if you look at a county council, there's something like, you know, 400 separate services, and what we're trying to do is kind of go through, I suppose, the key customer-facing service, kind of service by service, to look at how we can digitise and make the services much more accessible for members of the public. So the one we've done recently is blue badges. So we've looked at how you can actually renew your blue badge online with zero touch. So basically there won't be any kind of body behind the scenes kind of checking things. And that's actually gone pretty well actually in terms of renewals, because if you think about it, that should be pretty straightforward. You've already got on your blue badge, chances are your disability hasn't changed, and it should be a pretty straightforward process. So we're going through those kind of services one by one, looking at how we can digitise them. It might be something that Scrutiny Commission might want to have a look at, actually, because I think probably by the time we get to kind of the middle of the summer next year, we could probably demo some of those for you. So things like Report It for highways defects as well, we made some quite good progress on that. And until we've actually kind of made significant progress on that, you're not going to really impact on the demand going into the customer service centre. So hence why there's been a bit of a delay in terms of getting those savings, because you need to make sure that the digital offer is right, it works for members of the public. And also we'll be looking at the digital offer in terms of our own members of staff as well, about how we can again get some productivity and efficiency through that. So I think there's an increasingly kind of good story to tell around digital services. I'll say it might be something we could bring back here maybe in the summer.
I would like to say that the Report It app has improved over the time I've been watching it and using it, but I don't think the public know about it. I do tell them every time they report anything to me, but I don't think that we as a council are necessarily pushing it as hard as we could.
John?
In response to Dr. Ryan on paperless agendas, there's a paper coming to the next meeting of the group leaders recommending a trial, and if you wanted to ask Rosemary, Chairman, she might be able to say a few words about what's proposed.
Rosemary.
Yeah, this is a bit my pet project, so happy to speak about it a little bit. What we're proposing to do, we do have ModGov, and we do have the ModGov app, which should be accessible to all of you on your technology. So what we're proposing to do is trial a couple of meetings for the next 6 months or so, just to see how it goes with paperless meetings, how much take-up there is, whether there's anything that we need to change, rather than doing a kind of big bang rollout. But certainly we're working on a member digitalisation programme in the run-up to the new election, with the intention that at that stage it will be a lot more of a digital offer available for members. And you've also been invited to an all-member briefing on the 10th of February, which I would encourage you all to attend, which will include something about the digital strategy and communications with the customer service centre for members.
There you are. You got the answer. Terry Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, page 74, paragraph 31, and I know we'll be going into this. So let me say at the outset, I fully support this council looking after and providing country parks and open spaces. I think they're vital for our residents across the county. I always get slightly nervous when I see the word turnover as opposed to contribution, because it's almost as if it's trying to hide the fact that we've probably made a loss. So have we made a profit on the cafe so far? If so, what is the contribution to? And what I couldn't work out is, with country parks and open spaces, I couldn't work out on Appendix A which budget line the costs of maintaining that come into, and I couldn't find anywhere either in this report or the following report what is the costs of maintaining our country parks and what income do we currently derive from. I couldn't see that anywhere.
I'm pretty certain the cost of country parks, the net position is about 300,000. I'd have to get the split in terms of the gross and the net, but it's in that kind of order. In terms of the cafe at Beacon Hill, again, I'd have to get you a more detailed answer, but I'm pretty certain it's either a small contribution. I remember we're only 6 months in, and a big element of that has been over the winter. And I think there's a small profit, or broadly break even. But where we've actually made a considerable kind of profit is actually in the extra car parking income, which I think is going to be in the order of £40,000 or £50,000 higher for the year. So actually, if you look at it in totality, it's actually made a pretty good contribution to the overall departmental budget and to the county council's budget.
And the second part of the question on Appendix A, where does it appear?
Well, I'll have to get back to you on that. I'll be making up an answer if I can.
Well, do your written note, which heading it comes under. Right, honesty. Okay, any other questions on corporate resources? No, thank you very much. That completes the departmental reviews. We're just going to look briefly at the comments of the scrutiny committees, which will be forwarded on to the Cabinet for consideration. But of course, we've already heard that one of the issues that was discussed in relation to opening hours of household waste sites and the concern about that is not going ahead. And I think that's very welcome, as I've said earlier. Thank you, Byron, for confirming that this morning. Are there any other questions about the committee's deliberations, or anyone want to highlight anything that was discussed at any of the scrutiny committees, so that the leader is absolutely aware and the deputy leader going forward? Kevin.
Yeah, particularly the Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I mean, yeah, good briefing from Mike Sands, but it's clear that yet again, central government as yet are still slow releasing the forward-term projections. So, I mean, from the health budget, the public health budget, they've literally just had to more or less take last year's and just rubber stamp it and say, we'll go again with the same one. We really do need central government to take account of the fact that local government does need a bit of direction. I mean, that's what they're there for, like central government, aren't they?
It's the same point that Dan made earlier on. I mean, we call it an MTFS, but really it's a one-year MTFS. Really, all the rest of the numbers are based on the best estimates of highly qualified Declan and Chris.
Points noted then, Kevin. Terry?
Thank you, Chairman. Page 10 of the Green Papers, paragraph 5 in Roman numerals. I just don't think that, I mean, we discussed this at length at the committee. I don't think it has sufficient promise. The committee was massively impressed with this programme, and I think, you know, this has put a benchmark down on what perhaps can be done elsewhere in the council. I think it really needs to be brought to the attention what a success story this is, and, you know, how proud we were as a committee of the vision of our cabinet in terms of looking at this, bringing it in, and the hard work of officers to implement it, because this has made a dramatic change on the budget for adults and communities, and without which we would have been looking for another £6 million plus. So I just wanted to highlight that in this scenario.
Right, so that's welcome. Rosita.
Yes, and I would just like to raise page 7, 12, temporary traffic management. As most members probably know, this is one of the issues which is in our mailbox constantly. You know, the road closures, and then the damage which it brings to the roads and to the verges. And I have noticed that we are doing some community and parish engagement in relation to explaining the situation, etc. But I'd just like to put it on record that we might have to look at maybe helping out with verge maintenance or whatever else in future, because that is a very, very important issue.
Don't do that anymore.
I know, but
We've stopped doing it.
I know that, but that's why I said we might look at it in future again.
If we get more money.
Indeed, environment and transport has suffered as we've protected the vulnerable services of old people and children. It would certainly be our view as an administration that as and when we get more money, we need to really substantially start reinvesting back in the whole environment and transport arena. You know, we've not done verges, we've not done any footways, we've got worn out road signs, we've got worn out road markings. Our A roads and our B roads are super, well, they're okay. Go to the C roads, they're pretty poor. But we've done the best we can whilst protecting those vulnerable services throughout austerity. But we certainly need to revisit it if and hopefully we do get some more money.
May I just come back, Leader? Is there no possibility that we recharge the utilities, i.e. Severn Trent, because, you know, and take up some internal communications, because they employ outside contractors, etc., and we are incurring this due to their work?
We have an expert in the room. Can I ask him to come to the table, Chairman? Mr. Veers?
Yes,
Mr. Veers, your advice is welcome.
Yes. Hello, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. With the utilities and ourselves and so forth doing many roadworks around Leicestershire, just to say 50 to 60 new roadworks start a day in Leicestershire, so it's a lot to handle. One of the issues we have, and I know the verge issue is quite in on the rural areas, is you have to actually catch the person that did the damage on the verge, not the person who made them drive down that road in order to do it. We have no power to go back and recharge Severn Trent or one of the other utilities. And of course, to be out there and actually catch who's done it is rather difficult. I would say I would welcome, and the leader's been very supportive of, if we can get back to putting verges and others that people find very important, that would be good. Actually getting the perpetrators, really difficult.
Is the permit system an improvement on what we had before? Is it working?
Absolutely. We're better able now not only to manage the behaviour of people who are coming onto the network and doing the roadworks, we're better able to try and get them to organise together, because the worst thing, and I know our communities hate it with a passion, of one turns up, then another one turns up, then another turns up, then we turn up to fix the damage of the road that's been done, and it can be as many years of roadworks in an area. The number of roadworks actually going on is not only going down, but the length of time they're on is shortening. Pet hates such as the traffic signal still being left out there because the traffic management company hasn't come to remove it. We're able to fine the company for that because they've exceeded. Once again, we have a number of people who are paid for from those fines. The more we have, the better it would be. One of the things we're doing with that parish initiative is, okay, we've had this in over a year now, how can we better get information out to people? So we've invited a number of parishes where we've had lots of issues to come in and help us with that.
That's helpful. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Right, I'm proposing, Kevin.
Similar point, especially while Ian's there. I was stopped by residents in my village actually on Sunday to show. They wanted to show me their grass verge. So there was part of it is highways, definitely, a little narrow bit, which Severn Trent have totally destroyed while they did some roadworks in December. And the other side actually is maintained by the resident. It actually probably is, I mean, as it is, a bit of highways verge, but it's urban-ish, just on the edge of the village. And Severn Trent have just totally destroyed it. So the lady had gone out to them in December and said, "You've destroyed my verge. My husband is really going to struggle mowing that in future. I mean, it's just bumps and everything, and tree roots." And Severn Trent, "Oh, it's okay. We'll come back and reseed it for you." No sign, nothing. So I actually have sent something into customer services asking if they can be chased. But again, it's the same problem, isn't it? Severn Trent do the damage, and we end up effectively having to either sort it or chase them. And I just think somehow we need to be better control over, in this particular case, that utility.
Yes, verges where they're doing work, unlike where drivers are going round and round on the edges, where they're doing work, like the carriageway, we will always try and get them back to reinstate as they were before, because why should we accept anything less? Absolutely the right way, straight through to the customer services, let us know and we will follow up. Thank you, Dr. Feltham.
Right, we've solved one problem. Right, I propose to forward all the comments of the committees to the Cabinet as our response, plus the minutes today. I think you'll agree it's been a useful debate, particularly understanding the overall situation and the pressures. I'd like to thank the leader, the deputy leader, who's just leaving us. Thank you, Byron. The senior officers and the directors who have helped this morning. So yeah, I'm going to close this session now and thank everyone for their attendance.
Just ask Nick if he wants to stay.
Nick, do you want to stay for HS2? Right, okay. We'll just change the top table then, please.
Yes.
No, sorry. I should have said. We're just changing the order round with the committee's permission to do HS2 next, because Roderick O'Connor is at another meeting and he's on his way. So rather than pause, we'll press on. We've got the officers here and the lead member. We'll do HS2 and then we'll do Country Parks last. Just before I introduce this, can I make sure you've all seen on the table comments from the local member, Sean Sheehan? Have the officers got a copy of Mr. Sheehan's comments? Okay, perhaps you can give an initial response on that. You may want to write to Mr. Sheehan after the meeting. Right, who would like to introduce the HS2 report? Start with Bernard. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Project Manager Bernard Evans.
HS2 is the government's, High Speed 2 is the government's proposal for a new railway. It's probably the most significant infrastructure project that Leicestershire, well, the country has probably seen since the building of the motorways and for Leicestershire, the East Midlands Airport back in the 60s. It will bring many economic benefits. Those are yet to be quantified and we're busy waiting for the government announcement on HS2 and whether that will happen or not. We're working on the basis we're still preparing for it, so that's why we're here today. However, HS2 will also impact on our communities with loss of some homes and some businesses and a considerable disruption during construction that will potentially severely disrupt communities and how we deliver our services to them and how they access services that we provide. So the report gives a very brief overview of the programme that the government currently have, as I said a minute ago, subject to the outcome of the government review. This is a long-term project, and the idea is of LCC, Leicestershire County Council, engaging with HS2 is for us to get the maximum that we can from HS2 while we try and mitigate the impacts of its disruption. The report gives a very brief overview of some of the benefits that the County Council is hoping to achieve, and we've come up with some of these benefits by working with partner organisations that have already experienced working with High Speed 2 on earlier phases of phase 1 of the project. We are aiming to achieve around about £30 million of additional benefits had we not engaged. So if the County Council had not engaged with the HS2 project, we might have been subject to longer road closures and bigger impacts than what we would do had we engaged with them. And then the report also then goes on to highlight what the process is that we need to engage with the hybrid bill. And the hybrid bill is the mechanism that gives the government the power to deliver the railway, which includes effectively planning permission and compulsory purchase orders. And out of that hybrid bill, we get assurances and undertakings, which are a bit like planning conditions and 106 agreements, that give us the assurance that they will do what they've promised us to do. In order to have that voice in that process, at some point, a majority of the full council will have to vote on whether to petition the bill. And that will be a key decision as to how we can, all the work we're doing with HS2 in the background with officers at the moment, can actually get through to become part of those assurances and undertakings that we can later police to ensure that HS2 deliver what they've promised.
That's helpful. Just on that mechanical thing then, do you know what the time, I mean, first of all, the question is what's the outcome of the review? But let's assume the review presses ahead. What will be the timing of the council having to do this petitioning?
So the county council can't petition until the hybrid bill itself exists. So we can't take an early vote. At the moment, if it goes ahead as currently planned, we're expecting the hybrid bill to be deposited in the summer this year. However, subject to the review, that could be the end of the year, early next year. We simply don't know. Once the hybrid bill is out there, there's a brief period of 2 months where effectively the government validates the hybrid bill, and then there's a further period. Then it gets a second reading in Parliament, and then there's a window of 28 days where we can physically submit our petition. What we don't know is how long that window is between the two. So we could be talking about a period of 3 months or 6 months from when the hybrid bill is deposited to when that full council decision has to be taken. So it could be a tight window. If government's under the pressure to deliver HS2 early, which it might be, that window could be shorter. So unfortunately, it's an unknown at the moment.
Anything to add, Ian? No, happy. Nick, anything? Sorry, Trevor, anything?
The only thing I would say is, of course, we will, before we get to the full council meeting, which will have to sign off our petitioning, we will have to go to Cabinet as a result, and then from Cabinet through to full council. So the problem is that we don't know when that council meeting will be, Chairman, and so I would sort of caution members. It could be literally as soon as the hybrid bill is tabled, that will then set the clock ticking. We're not in charge of that, the government is. So a full council meeting will have to sign us off so that we can go and petition for the benefit of our constituents in Leicestershire, just to put that on the table.
One thing, Simon, being as the timescale is tight, I've asked the chief, and if we need to, we could have a special full council. And we don't need, I know people's diaries are blocked up, we don't need everybody to show. It's just that it physically has to go through full council, which is an anomaly, but we'll need to deal with it.
I think it would be a welcome anomaly, an agenda item on full council of such importance. You've answered the point that Ian was going to make. Okay, so open this for the discussion. So this seems to me to be really a report about process and facilitating it and the impact, rather than is this going to go ahead and is it a good thing or not. You're working on the basis that it is going to go ahead, and if it is going ahead, how can we best mitigate it? Because you talk a lot about the benefits of it, but I can't help but say, of course, there are disbenefits in the sense that there isn't going to be a station in Leicestershire. You're going to have to still tap into other networks in order to do your journey, aren't you? So, but that's not what we're focusing on here. What we're focusing on is, if it does go ahead, how can it best be managed and minimise the disruption and the impact? Is that a fair assessment? That's basically the work you're doing.
Absolutely spot on. It's not a debate about what's the best route or what the impact could or couldn't be. This is about if we didn't engage, we could seriously lose out. So this is about learning. We've learned from Warwickshire and talking to Buckinghamshire about how they've dealt with it, the controls they've got for traffic management, trying to minimise road closures, which we're talking about years, not months potentially for some roads. So that Leicestershire can carry on and then seek opportunities on top of that, where potentially our local businesses can win contracts with HS2 or their subcontractors, where we can get some STEM into schools, so that children today can become interested in engineering and science-based type projects. So the benefits by being proactive could be significant. They'll be difficult to quantify, but absolutely it's looking about what the benefits could be rather than what the disbenefits, which will absolutely be significant when construction happens.
Trevor.
Thank you. To carry on, if you like, just looking at the benefits for a second, small and medium-sized SMEs will, of course, be allowed to tender for contracts as HS2 comes through, and the LEPs in the county already beginning to organise those sorts of meetings for suitable businesses. It's also a skills driver. As far as I'm concerned, a lot of the skills for surveying and building and the like, the further education colleges can also put on here in Leicestershire, and that will then rub off, and we've heard earlier on today about house building. Well, all those skilled people will, of course, wash across onto the house building agenda as well, Chairman. Lots of others. I don't want to go too much into Towton and the classic compatibility and the links between Leicester Station, Derby Station, Nottingham, but they are there to be had in terms of capacity as well for us, and that's a benefit that we ought not to overlook. There are others, but that's just 2 or 3 from me for the moment.
So is that a given then, that if it goes ahead, that those links are addressed, or do we don't know yet? The classic compatibility, because I mean it is a big issue, isn't it, that you're still going to have to change.
You're absolutely right.
If you live in the majority of Leicestershire, you're going to have to change in order to get onto HS2. You can't just go unless you want to drive out of the county.
It depends how HS2 actually deliver that, and there is lots of speculation, but it is possible to do that. And for instance, to run normal trains, we'll call them normal trains, but compatible trains on some of the HS2 lines, and vice versa.
But we don't know the answer. We don't know whether that's going to happen yet.
That's correct. We don't know yet. We're waiting on what happens next to see what happens. Well, another point related to that is, as well as having to go to Towton to change the high-speed network, is we're working to make sure that we don't end up with effectively a local stopping service on the Midland Main Line, because all the fast trains are going down via Towton. So that's another thing that we've got a bit of a challenge to work with.
That would be a disbenefit, wouldn't it? If that was to happen, that would make a worse service on Midland Main Line, on top of the non-electrification of it. Right, okay. Any other questions? Mr. Finnemore, and then Terry Iron.
Thank you, Chair. It's just for the record, really, because my colleague mentions the infamous phrase SME businesses and the opportunity to tender. Just for the record, Rosemary, I'm the regional chair for the Federation of Small Businesses. So although I have a non-pecuniary interest in it, I certainly have one of a personal interest. Just for the record. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that clarity. We'll note that in the minutes. Right, Terry Iron.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this important report. Yes, I get the impression that there isn't strictly stated that there seems to be some kind of choice here between being proactive or petitioning, which I wasn't sure was made explicit, and I'm not sure it should be that choice. I have to agree with Councillor Sheehan, who was disappointed that local members were not alerted to this, I understand, by the procedure, though I recognise that this is mostly about process. He's right to say there is possibly undue emphasis on the benefits of HS2. We're having to scratch around for them a little. We've got 7 years of significant disruption. What you said about the Midland Main Line has worried me even more, because it's going to be 1 hour and 9 minutes longer to get to London from Colville than it currently is going by HS2, according to data that was received by North West Cheshire District Council some years ago. And I have memorised it because it is so important to our community. So then I'm worried here that in this, there's many good points that we have made that we would want to see resolved with HS2. there is absolutely no mention of wildlife, and I realise that the Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust, which is why I mentioned it in my interest, where I have a personal interest, are very concerned about the effect of HS2 on wildlife, and we've seen nothing in here to suggest that we've heard from them, and I hope we can hear from them what their concerns are and what they would want resolved prior to submission of any petition. Because I guess the way I would see it, given that we've got this problem with time, is that we need to be working on this excellent list, that, which is not the benefits, it's a wish list. Because we've got nice things in it that we'd all like to see, like money for the Ivanhoe line. That would be great. You know, work to protect Ashby Canal restoration. We've got a wish list of what we want to resolve. I think we need to add to it. I think we need to make sure that community groups who are currently not on this list need to get their stuff on this list, and that residents in places particularly like Measham need to get on their stuff on this list, and then we can tick them off. And if, when we get to this point when the hybrid bill comes, then those things that they haven't given us sufficient assurances for, and they have to be sufficient, not, oh Wes, we'd like to help you with the Ivanhoe, no, we'd like to see the colour of the money, that then we can tick off those things we're happy with and leave the things on that we're not happy with, and that's our petition. So I would see this as an iterative process, so that when it comes, we're not caught on the hop, you know, we can ensure that the content of our petition is right on. But there is one issue that I think I do need to point to, is that 20B, page 144, we will not see the final environmental statement prior to its submission, which is going to make it very difficult to get any rational work done on wildlife.
Okay, firstly, petitioning, yes, but it's proactive, yes, they're one in the same. So petitioning is the mechanism we have to be proactive. If we didn't petition, we simply wouldn't have a voice. Although we're working with HS2 now, and they seem to be listening to us, it's until the point you've made that the environmental statement gets published at the hybrid bill stage, we've got to then sift through the whole lot of that to make sure that what we've asked for is in there. The second point about wildlife, this is some of the aspirational things we're aiming at. We're drafting a huge list of all the things, working with many stakeholders and partners that includes the Wildlife Trust, National Forest and various other ecological experts, internal and external, and many other work streams, because this impacts every single service the County Council possibly delivers, how we deliver it, especially, I know we talked about digital services, but a lot of the stuff we deliver is delivered geographically. That's the only way we can get to our communities. So we are working with all those partners and stakeholders, and making sure that we're building that list up so we're all asking for the right things. There's a particular procedures that have to be followed with the government, that you have to be specially and particularly affected. So highway authority can talk about highway things and so on, but there's cross-pollination with all those bits of work that different people can ask for similar things, so that we're all, you know, we've all got one voice when we're challenging government on what their final proposals are.
Are we able to support organisations like the Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust to ensure that they get to petition, being a small organisation?
We are working with them, and so part of what we're doing, as well as understanding what the needs are, is going through what we understand, working with partners like Warwickshire, what the process is, so we can inform them what they need to do, and we're absolutely doing that, yes.
I would add, Chairman, that for Councillor Inan's benefit, we're also, of course, listening to the parishes and talking with the parishes and the district councils. We're at North West Leicester District Council tomorrow morning at 10:30. We shall be down at Measham later on this week, and earlier the following week there'll be Lockington and Hemmington. And so we are there discussing with them and checking their asks to be sure that we can represent them. Because the process for representation and is through petitioning, and as you say, it's an iterative process, and once we've done our first set of negotiations, then at the petitioning stage we will go with the rest. I'll leave the Ivanhoe line just for a minute, if you may. You may have other questions that you want to come back on.
Okay, Joe?
As in, is that an open question about, can I ask you what they're going to do about the Ivanhoe line?
Chairman, you've already asked, and I just wanted to be sure that I'd covered off all your other points before I came onto the Ivanhoe line, if that's all right. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so it will depend upon how they build HS2 and exactly what they do as to how much extra reinforcing they'll need to put in on the various parts of the rail as it goes up to the railheads, and they bring in all the equipment. And if that's the case, that will strengthen, of course, part of our infrastructure which we need to put in for the Ivanhoe line, or have to put in for the Ivanhoe line. So there is a benefit there in that way, Councillor.
Right, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The problem's sitting next to somebody from the same district, and they got their hand up just at the edge of similar questions. But anyway, first of all, I'd like to say that I welcome this report. I welcome HS2. It's a fact, hopefully it will be a fact of life. We can't bury our heads. Things have got to happen. I think there's very good storylines to say why we should have it. It does affect my ward personally, so I am very interested in this. The mitigation, I think, is going to be really significant, and I think that's the word we've all got to look at and to concentrate on, because if government says it's happening, it's happening. So that's the end of it. It's how we're going to deal with this situation. So the mitigation is going to be absolutely critical. I think it's going to be very important how we address road closures, because the length of the road closures, the inconvenience is going to be absolutely critical. I think that's really important. Obviously, what we refer to as the Ivanhoe line, I think is going to be very good for all the infrastructure that's happening. We're desperately looking in northwest Leicestershire on highway linkage because of the intensity of the roadworks and the new sort of storage and just-in-time depots that are popping up. So we've got it's a reality that we've got to find something. If that's going to be a catalyst, an idea to be able to say, well, let's do something that we've talked about for 20 years or more, it would be really helpful. I'm very interested in the canal as well, the mitigation there, on how we can do, because that is a good focal point for local people, and it's something as a benefit that it'd be lovely if we can sort of make sure that the mitigation is strong on there. And obviously the county themselves have been very helpful to a local charity in how they've positioned themselves, and I can only thank them again for all of their support. But it will be all about mitigation. It will be about getting that on the top line and making sure that's where we've got to go. That should be the only thoughts in our mind, is mitigation. Let's plan it. Let's set the stall out. And particularly what we're told that all early days we're looking at another 30 million. That's wonderful. Where will it go? Is it going to offset this and that? Is it better road infrastructure? It's mitigation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right, I'm going to take those as comments. I don't think you need an answer on any of your points. Acknowledged. Okay. You want more mitigation, right? Okay. Do you want to come?
Just to come back on the canal, which is a very good point. The canal, I think we were in a position in the 2018 consultation that HS2 presented us with, where they'd pretty much cut off the canal. We'd have to have gone down 3 locks and up 3 locks to get through. We're now in a position where it appears in their draft designs they are allowing for a free passage. We are going to try and push that a little bit more to see if we can get them to do a little bit of, maybe even build some of the canal if possible, so that which will really benefit the local community, and that's the mitigation, the values we're trying to realise from the project, so they leave a legacy behind, not a nasty taste in our mouth. That's the plan.
Thank you very much. Okay, Kevin.
Thank you, Chairman. When HS2, of course, was first mentioned a number of years ago now, the cry across Leicestershire, certainly from one of the MPs anyway, if not others, was that Leicestershire would have all of the pain and none of the gain. I think we now have a list of at least 13 possible gains here, which is better news, isn't it? In terms of balance, though, I would also like to see, in a way, and some of these actually are, in a way, not just benefits, but they also outline some of the disbenefits. But maybe balance, we ought to be looking at the final petition of some of the bits that maybe aren't going to be so good, but that's by the by. The main thing I want to say really is the leader mentioned earlier today that he's got a meeting coming up with the MPs, and I just think it's important that we make sure the MPs are alerted to exactly what we're trying to do here and the work that we've got and the petition, just so they are aware when they're talking about it at Parliament as well. Thanks.
All right, acknowledged. Nick, you'll mention it to the MPs?
Yes, of course, apart from Andrew Bridgen, because he's opposed to it.
Right, thank you very much. That's completed the discussion on this. It's really a report to note. You're not asking for any actions, but we do need to be aware that that window of opportunity that will occur at some point, if it goes ahead, that is, in relation to the petitioning. Thank you. Right, if we can just move to the last item on the agenda. I undertook to try and get the meeting finished by 1 o'clock, and that is possible, as long as you don't want to say too much about the country park strategy. This is an important report. It's good to see that in these times of austerity we can still improve our country parks and open spaces strategy. So we've got Roderick O'Connor, Assistant Director, Corporate Resources, who's going to introduce the report.
Okay, Chairman, I'll take my lead from your last comment. I'll also assume that everybody has actually read the report and the park, so I'll do quite a light touch introduction. The country parks strategy and action plan have been to Cabinet and are now at scrutiny for you to comment on. I think the best way of summarising this is to actually go to the strategy and the forward that Mr. Rhodes has got, because I think that tells us everything. It tells us about the changing environment. It tells us that parks and open spaces are not legally required. They cost money at a time when money is tight, but they do have a huge role to play in carbon reduction, supporting the environment and growing communities. So I'll take you to page 125. And I think a couple of points I would like to draw out. I've written the strategy to be a very light touch document. One of the reasons is I want people to read it. And by people, I actually mean the citizens and communities of Leicestershire. I think the crux of it is that country parks sit underneath the strategic priorities of the organisation. And if I can quickly run through them, they support health and well-being, which links in with public health and adults, volunteering and community, culture and heritage, education and learning, ecology and environment, and of course you've had a morning looking at the MTFS. We need to find ways forward to engage with communities, to gain sponsorship, to have legacy, what I call considered commercialisation. Putting in things like cafes into our parks and making sure that they actually not only attract people but wash their own faces. The final point I would make, as I'm sure it anticipates one of the questions, when I was writing the document, very conscious that money is too tight to mention, we focused on the 6 major parks that we have, and that's where we will begin to focus on our strategy. I outlined that the other parks were secondary. That does not mean that we will ignore them. Sitting in the audience is Richard Hunt, who just started with us last week, a new post, Head of Country Parks. Richard has a huge amount of experience in bids and funding, and we'll be embracing that to move things forward.
Thank you very much, Roderick. I'm glad you made that comment about the page 131, that there aren't like hierarchy in a secondary, a second tier parks. That in fact they're all country parks and they're all valuable assets, and we're going to look after all of them. I think that's an important clarification that you've made. Obviously, we recognise that there are the large major attractions like Watermead and so on and so forth, but we want to manage and look after them all. Okay, any other comments? Bill Bolter. Terry.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I welcome the report. As we mentioned at another meeting, the country parks have been somewhat neglected over the years, and we've got one or two that aren't meeting the required standard, and some of the open spaces aren't either. Hopefully we can move forward now and actually get some of these brought back into a better state than what they are at the present time. I welcome the appointment of a new manager. No doubt we will cross our swords at committee in a later date, but we'll start on friendly terms and we'll move on to other pastures. But the chair is quite right. We've got some major parks, but also got a lot of small parks. And as housing density gets tighter and tighter, these areas become more and more important. To have open space to actually walk around and go around is vitally important. The Victorians learnt that in their high density. They always had parks. We've got to relearn that lesson. And I hope we have more open spaces that we can maintain, and country parks are important. Commercialisation is fine to some degree. Let's not lose the purpose what country parks are for. It's not to produce major profits, that they have part of the community. If we can make a bit of money out of them, fine. But let's not just ban people by excessive car parking charges from using our country parks. They're there for everybody, not just the wealthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Take those comments on board. Terry Richards.
Thank you, Chairman. As I said earlier, I'm all for country parks and open spaces, and my heart sort of soared when I saw this report, and I looked at the first paragraph on page 122 and got quite excited, and then I looked at the bit in bold at the top of page 127, which says we will ensure that high quality, safe and accessible parks and open space provided and maintained to support our existing and future communities. And then my heart sunk when I turned to page 131 and find that we seem to ignore the people that live in southern and eastern Leicestershire. So if you draw a line across between Hinckley and Melton Mowbray, you've got 16 north of the line and 2 south of the line. So in Byron's favourite phrase of levelling up, and bearing in mind this is Byron's report, how are we going to level up the availability for all the residents of Leicestershire?
These are historic, and I mean there are 6 within a stone's throw of Ashby. I'd seen that. Yeah. Nick's very well served in his part of the world for country parks, but these were opportunities, if I remember, that sort of came along many years ago, and we took them at the time to either take land on or to deal with derelict land and things like that, and that's how these came about, and also where we could get funding for old coal fields and things like that. And we don't tend to have coal fields in the south of the county. It goes back. A lot of this was very controversial why we did this, but I think it turned out the right thing to do. But I don't know what. It's not. The other thing, of course, is that it's not just the county that has responsibility for parks and open spaces. So boroughs and districts can do it as well. Roderick.
Shall I respond? One of the reasons that I put in the map was for that very, to illustrate that very point, and it's something that the Director of Corporate Resources, Mr. Tambini, and I have discussed. In mitigation, what the leader said is absolutely right, and of course some of the parks that we received, such as Broombriggs Farm, were gifted to the County Council. There are, however, district parks in those areas. But I think it is something that we do need to address. And for example, around Lutterworth East through 106, we're actually looking at the potential of having a country park in there. So it is something we're conscious of, and I think it is something that we have to look at.
Whetstone Pastures could have one, couldn't it? When you press that one forward.
I'm perfectly happy with that, but there is nothing in the strategy about doing it that I could see. And you know, therefore, you know, I have a division south of that line, and you know, we need to sell this to our public, and you know, perhaps the money spent in areas where they've already got significant country parks could be diverted to buy land south of the line, to provide access for those. And bear in mind that county have got significant land holdings south of that line. Surely we have some land which could be apportioned to it anyway, which we already own.
So really the question is, could we have an ambition where opportunities arise, and it can be done either through development or opportunities that we would look to do more? Is that realistic?
I think it is realistic, and I can add that in as an aspiration into the strategy.
That's a very positive answer that you've had there, considering that the answer to most things is no, we can't, because of resources, not will. Right, Terry Einan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Roderick, for that answer, because I was slightly concerned that given that you point out that you're not a statutory service 6 times, not a core service once, and not a council priority 3 times, it feels like we are being told 10 times this is not a priority, so we're lucky to have them. So I was a little bit worried that we might excite envy with that map of the former mining coal fields, where quite a lot of the land is not beautiful and agricultural and delightful as it is in the south and the west of the county, but has had to be reclaimed. And many of these parks, including Snibston, which is one of the major parks, is reclaimed land, former tip, which so I'm very pleased that we have this strategy that is planning to look after some of these parks, and and I'm also pleased that you're interested in what the community want to do, because clearly if you're going to have green flags for all 6 of them, which would be lovely to see, you are going to have to work with the community to get them, having done a green flag for Colville Park, where we've got a very active Friends of Colville Park. I'm not quite sure where we sit with Friends for our country park in my patch, and I think they would probably like the people who run the Facebook group interested in regenerating Colville, which does what it says on the tin, I'm sure would be interested and to work with you, and I'm hoping that you can use the green flags to get engagement right across the piece. I think there are other groups who are interested in this also from the point of view of climate change, which gets quite a mention in this strategy, which is nice to hear. And one of the responses, I've had some responses from people particularly interested in climate change, and one of their main concerns has to be challenging our wish to increase revenue from car parks. Because that is an issue. Snibston Park is, of course, extremely accessible. You can walk to it from the town centre, and if we had a railway, it'd be even better because you could walk to it from there. And in fact, many of the parks over to the far west of the county would be much more accessible if we had a National Forest line, and then people could walk to them and use public transport. Beacon Hill, it's 15 minutes from Colville by car, and from Loughborough. It's 2 hours and 10 minutes on foot. Google can't even find a bus. So we've got a problem if we're going to have a green strategy for country parks that relies on attracting people to them by private petrol-driven transport. So I'm not quite sure how we deal with that. Suggestions that came up were obviously looking into public transport. I think that is just such a difficult thing to do. But perhaps looking with how we can work with community groups to ensure that our parks are accessible, particularly places like Beacon Hill, which is so lovely, especially now you've got the new cafe, and more cycle stands perhaps, or working with organisations who do e-bikes to encourage people to travel to our parks without destroying the environment on the way. And another brilliant idea they came up with is working with those litter-producing businesses to remove the litter from our parks. I know in Colville we work with McDonald's and KFC, who are great litter producers, to also lift some of the litter out of our Nature Alive park. And is that something we can be looking into?
Quite a list there, Roderick.
Chair, I was just going to say I don't know where to begin. We will look at all of those things, and they all need consideration. One of the interesting things about parks is they involve many people in their interests, but sometimes those interests are diametrically opposed. The horse riders don't necessarily like the cyclists. some people who wanted to do certain things around ecology conflict with other things. It's about striking the balance. I think I'm very measured in my approach, and a few comments have been made around commercialisation. I think people do accept these days infrastructure does get worn and torn, and generally people are willing to pay reasonable car parking, and our parks, not all parks elsewhere, but our parks always try and have reasonable parking around them. Going back to your point, and I really have lost my train of thought with your comments, Terry, but going back to your point about reclaimed coal mines, you know, I think the evidence is that it speaks for itself. We're doing huge amounts of work around the development of Coalville, and you know from my own engagement that we are trying to also engage with special groups, special interest groups, and make sure that the community is actually involved in that.
I just want to say, I hope you didn't think any of what I was saying was a criticism. I think you're doing awfully well, and particularly in Snibston. I'm really pleased with it, and I have no problem with you having cafes. Cafes are a great way to keep things going. I think when it comes to car parking, whether our strategy should be to increase our revenue, I think from a from a climate change point of view, it would be nice if our strategy made people think twice about taking their car there, but also for those people who have no choice, provide them with a choice by which they could get there without the use of a private car.
In a final response, no, I didn't take it as criticism at all. I just meant that it was complex. But I think one of the reasons why I've been quite explicit about the fact that we will work across other departments is because we'll use the expertise in areas such as public health, environment and transport to make sure we try and address some of those issues.
Yep. You know, Mr. Chairman, excellent report. I congratulate you on that. I would hate to rain on your parade, but S106 was debated several hours ago, and the need of that for serious infrastructure is probably not going to be very helpful towards what you're doing. But I would urge you to have a look at the commerciality of all of this. You know, it's not going to be a fun park to compete with huge fun parks in the sense of that. But I think we have to be commercially right. I think there's things like wood turning and forestry businesses. We've got to look at how we can make it more exciting. You know, so when young people go, whether it's young children, because you've got lifelike figures of people who were from that history that we're trying to portray, I think we've got to make it more exciting. I know that the cost of funding, but I think you've got to try and work within somehow because of the situation of what funding is available, whether there's government or other areas that you can strike with. But I think the more you can do commercially to try to attract funding, to give you some ability to be able to put money and probably open a little park for Terry somewhere. It can just go around.
A big one.
A big one. But anyway, so I want to encourage you. That's fantastic. The report's very good. My concern is on finance for you, because this is going to be some serious money over a long period of time. This isn't one a hit and everything's done. We've got to find ways, and one way is some form of commerciality involving other sort of appropriate businesses that could come in and do different works that would probably be, and then the forestry, you know, dealing with it. You know, what are you going to do with your timbers when you're thinning out, and how's the whole thing going to operate? It would obviously then provide some form of income or ongoing finance. Then you've got something that you can start to develop, and rangers and proper paid full-time rangers, as apart from somebody turning up as and when they can. So, and then it becomes really important then, and it takes a shape, its own life begins to develop. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair, I do agree with all of those points. And we have actually started at Beacon Hill putting in a labyrinth and wooden. We've got a whole lot of sculptures, wooden sculptures. We've put in about 7 or 8 of them to try and do exactly what you're talking about, link in with wood, link in with the natural environment, but also have some attractive things to bring children and the parents into the parks. And I think you're also right, because with a lot of organisations focus on social responsibility, I think there are good opportunities to work with a lot of the big businesses in Leicestershire to get some funding and to work with them in partnership. I think the point's well made.
Okay. Jeffrey.
Well, I just wanted to point out that there are other country parks in Leicestershire which we ought to be working together with. We've got Brox Hill in Oadby. We don't charge for parking there, but it's a first-class country park. But I think somebody ought to make a list and publicise the wonderful country parks and publicly owned parks that are available. And we ought to be working together with the districts and the National Forest and everybody to make sure everybody is aware of the facilities that are available. And congratulations on this.
Perhaps a comprehensive map of all major park facilities, but you'd have to get 7 district and boroughs to agree to chip in, but it would be in their interest, I think, to do that. Thank you, Jeffrey, for that. Mr. Philman?
I've just been patiently listening, Mr. Chairman, and yeah, I think every single comment is valid, but I'm just concerned that this view of commercialisation missed a key phrase that Roderick used earlier, which is they have to be able to wash their face, which inherently means cost neutral. Doesn't mean anything about making profit, it's about cost neutral. Yeah, and I wouldn't want members to lose sight of that. Thank you, Chair.
That's a very good point. Rosita, you've got the last word.
Yes, thank you. And as there have been so many words, I tried to make it short. In relation to Jeffrey, I fully support a comprehensive list, but I do think on page 131 there should be an item 19, and as open spaces, the SSSI in Lutterworth, because I think it is a very important open space and it should be listed there, especially as this is a strategy and it will be taken in consideration for section 106, etc., etc. The other thing it is, and I made a list so I don't waffle. Now, strategic outcomes must include an emphasis on the fact that country parks and open spaces and the strategy complements the Council's agenda to achieve carbon neutrality and offset our carbon footprint. And I think this is a major point you have omitted in this strategy. And because tree planting, etc., we're trying to do everything to offset our carbon footprint, so we have to really refer in writing to this in this strategy. And I think on page 97, where you have those little boxes, I think it should go into a strategic outcome, either under ecology and environment or another box to reduce carbon footprints. And I think on page 127, we're talking about goals. And I think that is, priority themes. I think that should be also a major goal to offset carbon footprint, which we are indirectly doing by planting trees, nurturing the environment, etc., etc. Thank you. And yes, very good strategy.
You'd like to send Mrs. Page a copy of the report you've presented recently on trees?
You took the words out of my mouth, Chair.
If I may come back, that isn't the point. The point is that I think it needs to be reflected in the strategy and its goals. Yes.
That can be easily done.
Thank you.
There you are. You've got agreement.
Good.
So there's been a number of comments and suggestions which you're going to take away, and a couple of suggestions for bringing things out a bit clearer. Will you look at that before? Is this going to be like finally tweaked and published, is it? He's going back there. Is there any other consultation planned? Okay, that's useful. Right. Thank you very much, Roderick, for presenting that. That completes all the business this morning. I'll just remind you before I close the meeting that the next meeting of the Commission is scheduled to take place on the 11th of March at 10:30 if I remember rightly, we've got quite a heavy agenda. No, it's gone down. We haven't. So it's April we've got a heavy agenda, so hopefully the March meeting will be over by lunchtime. The April meeting is likely to run into the afternoon, so just beware, but we will break for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.